It was March 18, 1945. The Third Army was racing through southern Germany, pursuing a collapsing Wehrmacht into the heart of Bavaria. The war was ending. Everyone knew it. But Colonel James Henderson of Army Intelligence didn't know what he was looking for until he found it. A coded message intercepted weeks earlier had mentioned something called Anlage Schwarzwald, Installation Black Forest. The signal originated somewhere in the densest part of the Black Forest, near the town of Triberg. There were no major cities there. No military installations marked on any map. No obvious strategic value. Just forest villages and deep valleys. Henderson was skeptical, but something in the intercepts bothered him. The language was unusual. Scientific terminology mixed with military protocols. References to specimens, quarantine procedures, containment protocols. It didn't sound like a weapons factory or a weapons depot. It sounded like something else entirely. Something that required isolation, secrecy, control. On March 19th, Henderson led a jeep convoy up a narrow mountain road. The forest was dark, primordial, suffocating. Towering pines blocked out the sky. Mist hung between the trees like something alive. 20 miles into the forest, they found the fence. 8 feet high, topped with barbed wire, posted with signs in German. Betreten verboten, Gefahr. Enter forbidden, danger. But there were no guards. No checkpoint, no one to challenge them. Henderson ordered the fence cut. The convoy passed through into a compound hidden so deep in the forest that even from the fence line, you couldn't see more than 30 feet in any direction. The first building they encountered looked like a hunting lodge. Wooden beams, sloped roof, windows with heavy black curtains. But through one small window, Henderson could see something that didn't belong in a hunting lodge. A laboratory bench lined with Bunsen burners, microscopes and glass apparatus filled with clear, yellowish liquid. He ordered his men to secure the perimeter and search all structures. What they found over the next 3 hours would haunt many of them for the rest of their lives. The architecture of horror, the Black Forest facility wasn't large. Maybe 40 acres total, hidden among the pines. But it was meticulously organized, almost surgical in its precision. There were 7 main buildings. The first was the administrative center, a comfortable 2-story house where officers lived and worked. On the desks were files marked Projektbericht, project reports. In a locked safe, Henderson's team found something that made their blood run cold: photographs. The photographs showed people in laboratory settings, but not just any people. Prisoners, thin, hollow-eyed, covered with surgical marks. Some of them were visibly diseased. Others had open wounds. Some appeared to be in the final stages of death. The captions were in German, clinical, and detached. Subject 23, day 14 of infection. Pustule formation progressing as expected. Subject 41, day 28, end-stage hemorrhagic presentation. Subject 8, day 42, mortality achieved. The second major building was a greenhouse, but it wasn't full of plants. It was full of insects. Thousands of them. Mosquitoes, flies, and other species that Henderson's team couldn't immediately identify. They were kept in sealed glass containers, each labeled with careful German notation and numbers. The third building was the primary laboratory. Rows of workbenches, each with microscopes, centrifuges, and culture plates. Walls lined with shelves containing hundreds of sealed glass containers, each filled with a different substance. Some were clear, some were cloudy. Some contained things that looked almost like tissue samples. On the laboratory walls were charts. Elaborate detailed charts showing what appeared to be disease progression, fever curves, mortality rates, incubation periods, infection vectors. One chart in particular caught Henderson's attention. It showed a timeline titled Dissemination Protocol. It detailed how a disease could be spread across Europe in a matter of weeks if properly introduced. The chart included estimates of casualties. Millions. The fourth building was smaller, isolated from the others. It had a single sign on the door: Quarantine. Inside were hospital beds. 6 of them, each with thick leather restraints. Bloodstains on the mattresses suggested they had been used. Recently, in a cabinet beside the beds were medication bottles, some empty, some full. The labels were handwritten: phenol for injection, morphine for terminal cases, sedative for violent subjects. The 5th and 6th buildings appeared to be barracks, but they were sealed. When Henderson's men forced the doors, They found them empty, except for straw on the floors and drainage channels cut into the concrete. The smell of feces and decay still lingered despite the doors being open to the air. The seventh building was the most disturbing. It was constructed of reinforced concrete with only one entrance, a heavy steel door with multiple locks. Inside, Henderson's team found something that would require them to call in specialists. Incinerators, industrial-sized, designed to burn large quantities of organic material. Tests later revealed traces of human bone in the ash. But before Henderson could properly secure the site, something happened. The scientist who remained in the main laboratory, the team found him sitting at a workbench calmly writing in a leather journal. He didn't try to escape. He didn't try to resist. He just looked up and smiled. His name was Dr. Klaus Helmuth Richter. Age 42, blonde hair going gray, blue eyes behind round spectacles. He looked like a librarian, not a monster. "I have been waiting for you," Richter said in perfect English, his German accent barely noticeable. "I knew the facility would eventually be discovered. I wanted to remain here to ensure the documentation survived." Henderson's first instinct was to arrest him, but he quickly realized that Richter might be the only person who could explain what the Black Forest facility actually was. Over the next 6 hours, in a commandeered room in the administrative building with a tape recorder running, Richter told his story. He had been born in Frankfurt in 1903. His father was a physician. His mother was a chemistry professor. He had always been brilliant. By age 20, he had already published papers on bacterial genetics. By age 25, he was conducting research at the University of Berlin. "I was not a Nazi," Richter said, though no one had asked. "I was a scientist. I believed science was objective, above politics. I was wrong. In 1936, the Nazi regime had taken an interest in Richter's work. They wanted him to study biological warfare agents, specifically ways to weaponize diseases, ways to turn them into tools of mass killing. At first, Richter had refused. But then they explained what would happen if he didn't cooperate. His research funding would be cut. His university position would end. His family would be investigated for political unreliability. It was the standard Nazi coercion. Subtle, effective, inescapable. By 1939, Richter was working for the Wehrmacht's Biological Warfare Division. He was tasked with developing diseases that could be weaponized. Diseases that were contagious, deadly, and ideally untraceable to their origin. "We focused on 3 main pathogens," Richter explained. A variant of typhoid, a form of plague, and most importantly, something we called the Black Death resurrected, a hemorrhagic fever similar to what we now believe was the original medieval plague, but modified for maximum transmissibility. The Black Forest facility had been built in 1941, hidden so deep in the German countryside that Allied bombers would never find it. Its purpose was to refine these biological weapons, to test them, to perfect them. "We needed subjects," Richter said matter-of-factly. "Test subjects." Henderson felt his stomach turn. "Where did you get them?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "From the camps," Richter said. "Dachau, Ravensbrück, Auschwitz. They sent us prisoners. Political prisoners, mostly Poles, Czechs, a few Jews, some Soviet prisoners of war." "How many?" Henderson asked. Richter paused. "I kept careful records. 347. Over the course of the facility's operation, we received and experimented on 347 subjects." Henderson did the math. "How many survived?" "None," Richter said simply. "The diseases don't leave survivors." That was the point. Dr. Richter's journals, recovered from the laboratory, provided a horrifying account of what had transpired at the Black Forest facility over 4 years. The first experiment began in the spring of 1941. 40 prisoners arrived by truck from Dachau. They were told they were being relocated to a factory. Instead, they were herded into the sealed barracks and locked inside. "We infected them deliberately," Richter wrote in one entry from May 1941. "The subject group was exposed to vectors carrying a modified typhoid strain. We wanted to observe transmission rates and mortality patterns. The prisoners began showing symptoms within 48 hours. Fever, violent diarrhea, delirium. By day 5, 3 were dead. By day 10, 23 were dead. By day 15, 30 were dead. The remaining 10 were finished off with morphine injections to prevent contamination of the corpses. Results suggest the modified strain achieves 80–90% mortality rate in enclosed populations, Richter wrote. Further refinement could achieve 95% plus with the addition of increased transmissibility markers. The second experiment used a plague variant. 60 prisoners. Different delivery method. Instead of direct exposure, the disease was carried by infected fleas housed in the greenhouse and intentionally released into the barracks. The vector proved effective, Richter noted. Transmission occurred within 72 hours. Primary infection sites appeared in all subjects by day 5. Mortality rate achieved 95% by day 20. Secondary cases appeared in one of our research staff, requiring quarantine protocols. That research staff member was executed. Richter's journal doesn't record his name or show any remorse. The third and most ambitious series of experiments used the hemorrhagic fever. The Black Death resurrected. These experiments were more complex and more cruel. We are now testing delivery mechanisms. Richter wrote in an entry from January 1943, the agent survives aerosolization. We dispersed it in a fine mist into the subject chamber. Results were catastrophic. In a positive sense, infection occurred in all subjects within hours. Symptoms appeared within 24 hours. The hemorrhaging was severe as predicted. By day 3, subjects were coughing blood. By day 5, 3 subjects died in spectacular fashion. Complete internal hemorrhage. Blood poured from every orifice. It was, and here Richter used a German word that translated roughly to magnificent, truly remarkable in terms of pathological presentation. By 1944, the experiments had evolved into something even more disturbing. Richter wasn't just studying transmission, he was studying psychological effects. We told the subjects they would be going home. One journal entry read, "We wanted to observe behavioral changes in subjects who believed they had hope." Morale remained higher during the early infection phase. This is relevant to weaponization scenarios where enemy morale must be maintained for maximum transmission before symptoms appear. In other words, Richter's team was planning to use hope itself as a weapon. They would tell infected prisoners they were being released, then send them back into the general population, spreading disease among people who didn't realize they were infected. The journals also revealed that Richter's team wasn't working in isolation. There were references to other facilities. A place called Kagome in occupied Manchuria, where Japanese scientists were conducting similar experiments. A facility in Romania where Soviet prisoners were being used. A network of biological warfare research spread across the Nazi-controlled world. But the Black Forest facility was the most advanced. It was where the techniques were perfected, where the worst horrors were refined into pure executable science. In the autumn of 1944, as German military collapse became inevitable, the Nazi leadership made a decision. The Black Forest facility would conduct one final experiment, the largest and most ambitious yet, a proof of concept for the ultimate biological weapon. 200 prisoners were transported to a facility near Prague that had been specially prepared for the operation. They were infected with the hemorrhagic fever strain. Then, after the initial infection phase had passed, but before symptoms became obvious, they were released. They were told they were free, Richter wrote. That the war was ending, that Germany was opening its camps, that they could go. Most headed toward the advancing Soviet lines. We wanted to observe how far the disease would spread. The results were catastrophic. Within 3 weeks, there were outbreak reports from across Eastern Europe, Prague, Vienna, Budapest. Cases were appearing in refugee camps, in hospitals, among the Soviet troops advancing toward Berlin. The disease was doing what it was designed to do, spreading silently, killing efficiently, and tracing back to no obvious source. Except the war ended before the experiment could reach full scale. Soviet troops liberated Eastern Europe faster than the disease could spread. By May 1945, when Richter was captured, the outbreak had been contained. Roughly 3,000 people had died. We were so close, Richter told Henderson during his interrogation. Just a few more weeks. If the war had lasted another month, if we'd had more subjects, more facilities, we could have infected millions. We could have changed the outcome of the war. Henderson felt bile rising in his throat. You're talking about genocide? About killing millions of people? Richter nodded as if agreeing on a matter of academic interest. Not genocide, weaponization. Genocide implies intention toward a specific group. This was intended for anyone, enemies, civilians. Whoever was infected would die, indiscriminately. That was the elegance of it. When the full extent of the Black Forest facility became clear, military command faced an unprecedented problem. The facility's existence couldn't be made public, not immediately. To do so would reveal that Nazi Germany had been conducting biological warfare research for years. It would raise uncomfortable questions about what the Allies had known and when they had known it. More troublingly, it would force a reckoning with Soviet allies who were already becoming adversaries. The Soviets were conducting similar research. They had captured German scientists and facilities. If the full extent of biological warfare capabilities became public, it might trigger a biological arms race that would make nuclear weapons look quaint. So the decision was made. The Black Forest facility would be secured. Richter and the few surviving members of his research team would be detained, but quietly, and the public would never know the full truth. Richter himself posed a dilemma. He was undoubtedly a war criminal. He had conducted experiments on human beings. He had murdered 347 people in the name of science, but he was also a genius. His knowledge of biological warfare was unparalleled. The American military intelligence complex recognized that Richter's expertise could be valuable. By 1946, Klaus Helmuth Richter had become part of Operation Paperclip. He was relocated to Fort Detrick, Maryland, where the U.S. Army's biological warfare program was centered. He was given a new name, a false identity, and a position as a research scientist. For the good of national security, the official documentation read, Dr. Klaus H. Richter is to be considered valuable personnel and protected from external inquiry. For 12 years, Richter worked for the U.S. government. He helped develop biological weapons delivery systems. He studied how diseases could be weaponized and dispersed. He trained American scientists in techniques he had perfected at the Black Forest facility. In 1958, when international pressure began mounting regarding Nazi war criminals, Richter was quietly retired. He was given a pension, a small house in Maryland, and an agreement of silence. He lived there until 1972, when he died of a heart attack. His obituary in the local paper identified him simply as Klaus H. Richter, retired Army researcher. No mention of the Black Forest facility. No mention of the 347 prisoners. No mention of the experiments. No justice. After the war, the Nuremberg trials prosecuted many Nazi war criminals. The doctors who had conducted experiments at concentration camps. The SS officers who had run the camps. The politicians and military leaders who had designed the policies. But the architects of biological warfare mostly escaped prosecution. Some, like Richter, were recruited by Western powers. Others fled to South America or the Middle East, where they continued their work in secret. The facilities were destroyed. The documents were classified. The scientists were scattered. It was as if the Black Forest facility had never existed. For decades, the American public knew nothing about it. The British knew nothing. Even many government officials who weren't directly involved in Paperclip had no idea. It wasn't until 1975, more than 30 years after the war ended, that a declassified document revealed that the U.S. government had in fact employed former Nazi biological warfare researchers. The revelation created minimal outrage. By then, the Cold War was in full swing. The Soviet threat was real and immediate. The sins of the past seemed less important than the dangers of the present. In 1995, a historian named Dr. Elaine Williams published a book titled The Hidden Laboratory, detailing the Black Forest facility and its role in World War II. The book received modest attention. A few universities assigned it. A few historians read it, but it never became mainstream knowledge. It never forced a national reckoning with what the government had done. By then, Klaus Helmuth Richter was long dead, and most of the surviving personnel had also passed away. There was no one left to try, no one left to punish, no one left to demand accountability from. Today, the Black Forest facility is a German historical site. Tourists can visit. There's a small museum explaining what happened there, a plaque listing the names of the victims. But in the United States, the knowledge of what happened there remains compartmentalized in declassified government documents that most Americans will never read. The question that haunts historians is, what would have happened if Germany had survived? If the war had lasted another year? If Richter's last experiment had been allowed to continue? The mortality rates he achieved suggest that if he had been given 3 years instead of 3 weeks, he could have developed a biological weapon capable of killing millions. A weapon that couldn't be defended against, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be stopped once it started. In 1962, a declassified military memo suggested that if deployed correctly, Richter's hemorrhagic fever could have killed 60% of the global human population within 18 months. That's not conjecture. That's what American military analysts believed was possible based on Richter's research. What's most disturbing about the Black Forest facility isn't what happened there. It's that it wasn't unique. After the war, the U.S. government established its own biological warfare program at Fort Detrick. The Soviet Union did the same at Vector Institute in Russia. Japan denied everything but was widely suspected of continuing research. During the Cold War, biological weapons were developed with the same intensity and dedication that had been applied to nuclear weapons. In 1972, facing international pressure, the major powers signed the Biological Weapons Convention, which banned biological warfare. But the treaty had weak enforcement mechanisms. More importantly, it allowed research that could be justified as defensive. So the research continued, in laboratories around the world, sometimes openly, often in secret. The Black Forest facility was closed, but the work it pioneered was preserved. In 2001, American researchers using publicly available information estimated that the techniques developed at Black Forest could produce a smallpox variant with 80% lethality and 95% transmissibility. In other words, everything that Richter had been working toward in 1945 was theoretically achievable with 21st century knowledge and modern biological engineering. We didn't learn from the Black Forest facility. We learned from it. We refined it. We took it further. In 1989, a journalist tracked down Dr. Klaus Helmuth Richter's former assistant, Dr. Wilhelm Erhardt, who had survived the war and lived in relative obscurity in West Berlin. Erhardt was 87 years old, frail, and didn't have much time left. The journalist asked him a simple question: "Do you have any regrets?" Erhardt was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Regrets about what specifically? The prisoners? The experiments? The fact that we helped the Americans build the same weapons after the war? I have regrets about all of it, but I also have regrets about nothing. I was a scientist. I did science. What happened afterward is not the responsibility of the scientist. It's the responsibility of politicians, of generals, of the people in power." But, he paused, "I think I was wrong about that. I think the scientist is responsible too. We told ourselves we were just seeking knowledge. But we were seeking knowledge about how to kill. That's not neutral. That's not objective. That's complicity." He was asked if he thought Klaus Richter, wherever he was, felt the same way. Richter? Erhardt laughed bitterly. Richter never doubted himself. Not for a moment. He saw himself as a visionary, someone who understood what would be necessary in the future. He believed the diseases he created were inevitable. Someone would create them eventually. He was just first. He was just honest about it. But that's what makes him so dangerous in our memory. Because he's right. Someone will create them eventually. And when they do, the Black Forest facility will seem like a child's experiment compared to what's possible. Erhardt died 2 months later. He took the specifics of what he and Richter had done to his grave. The ghosts of Black Forest. The Black Forest facility no longer exists. The buildings were decontaminated and destroyed in 1948. The research was scattered. The scientists were dispersed. But the knowledge lives on. It exists in declassified documents, in historians' archives, in academic papers written carefully to avoid revealing too much, in the memories of men and women who worked at Fort Detrick in the 1950s, who knew what they were building and why. The 347 prisoners who died at the Black Forest facility remain unnamed. They were never given proper burials. They were incinerated. Their families never knew what happened to them. No memorial marks their graves because they have no graves. Today, biological weapons are banned by international law. But so were chemical weapons. So was genocide. Laws don't stop determined governments. They just slow them down. In 2015, a biosecurity expert at Johns Hopkins estimated that a weaponized pandemic could kill 15 million people in 3 weeks if properly engineered. That was using 2015 technology. With 2025 knowledge, the number could be higher. The Black Forest facility was a place where people tried to answer the question, how many people could one government kill if they decided to? Klaus Helmuth Richter believed the answer was all of them. He wasn't trying. He died before he could find out. But in a world where the knowledge of how to build such weapons exists, where genetic engineering becomes more accessible every year, where biotech becomes easier and cheaper to do, the question becomes, How long before someone asks that question again? And this time, they might not be stopped by the end of a war. The Black Forest facility didn't just kill 347 people. It introduced a possibility into human consciousness. The possibility that disease could be a weapon, that science could be turned toward mass killing, that a small group of brilliant people, working in isolation, could develop something that could end human civilization. That possibility never goes away. It echoes forward. It haunts every person who understands what's theoretically possible. And as our technology becomes more powerful, as our genetic knowledge becomes deeper, as our ability to engineer biology becomes more refined, that echo becomes louder. In the Black Forest, among the ancient pines and morning fog, the facility is gone, but the ghosts remain. The ghosts of 347 prisoners, the ghost of Klaus Helmuth Richter and his vision of a biological future, and the ghost of a question that once asked can never be unasked. What would happen if someone tried again?